One quiet painting hides a truth meant to stay buried. Welcome to Sherlock Hub. I am your host, Bracknell. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your voices matter. Let's uncover the secret together. The story begins. The autumn of 1891 brought with it an unseasonable chill that settled upon London like a shroud, and with it came a case that would test even the formidable faculties of my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I had returned to our old lodgings at 221B Baker Street, following a brief sojourn in the country, where I had been tending to a former patient, and found Holmes in one of his characteristic moods of restless energy. Pacing before the fireplace, his long fingers steepled beneath his sharp chin, his gray eyes fixed upon some invisible problem that occupied the theater of his remarkable mind. "She, Watson!" he exclaimed upon my entrance, though he had not turned to observe me. "You have returned from Hertfordshire, I see, and your patient, the retired colonel with the recurring malarial fever, has made a satisfactory recovery. Mrs. Hudson has been unusually generous with the coal this morning, which suggests she expects visitors of some consequence, and unless I am very much mistaken, we shall have a caller within the next quarter hour who will present us with a problem of considerable interest." I had long since abandoned any pretense of surprise at these casual demonstrations of his powers. Setting down my medical bag, I took my accustomed chair and regarded my friend with the familiar mixture of admiration and curiosity that his presence invariably inspired. "You deduce all this from what, Holmes?" I asked, and though I confess the question was more ritual than genuine inquiry. "Observation, my dear Watson, coupled with the most elementary deduction," he replied, finally turning to face me. "Your boots bear traces of the distinctive reddish clay found primarily in the Hertfordshire countryside, and the left heel shows a fresh repair, evidence of extended walking on uneven terrain, precisely what one would expect from house calls to a rural patient. Your telegram yesterday mentioned the colonel's improved condition, which naturally explains your return. As for Mrs. Hudson's preparations," he gestured toward the sitting room, where I now noticed she had arranged the furniture with unusual care and laid out the good china. "She received a message by special messenger at 9 o'clock this morning, and I observed the livery through the window. Dark blue with silver braiding, the colors of the Ashworth family." "The Ashworths?" I interjected. "The banking family?" "The very same. One of the oldest and most respected financial institutions in the city. If they have sent a messenger to request my services with such urgency, you may be certain the matter is one of exceptional delicacy." He withdrew his watch and consulted it with evident satisfaction. "And if my calculations regarding the messenger's route and the time required for the family to make their decision are correct, our visitor should arrive in approximately—" The sharp peal of the doorbell interrupted his prediction, and Holmes allowed himself a thin smile of vindication. "Punctuality," he observed, "is often the first indication of a methodical mind. And methodical minds make the most interesting clients. They have already attempted to solve their own problem through logical means, which suggests the puzzle before us is genuinely complex." Mrs. Hudson's footsteps sounded upon the stairs, followed by a brief, muted conversation in the hallway. A moment later, she appeared at our door, her expression grave. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she announced with unusual formality. "Sir Edmund Ashworth and his daughter, Miss Constance Ashworth." The gentleman who entered our sitting room was perhaps 60 years of age, though he carried himself with the upright bearing of a much younger man. His features bore the marks of breeding and prosperity. A high forehead, intelligent eyes set beneath silver brows, and a mouth that suggested both strength and discretion. His attire was impeccable. A morning coat of the finest cloth, a silk cravat fixed with a simple gold pin, and gloves of supple leather. Yet despite this outward composure, I detected signs of considerable distress in the tightness around his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands as he removed his hat. Behind him came his daughter, a striking young woman of perhaps 25 years. Miss Constance Ashworth possessed her father's bearing, and I surmised his intelligence. Her dark hair was arranged in the current fashion, and her traveling dress, though suitably modest, was of excellent quality. What struck me most forcibly, however, was the expression in her clear gray eyes, a combination of worry and determination that spoke of considerable strength of character. "Mr. Holmes," Sir Edmund began, his voice well modulated despite his evident anxiety, "I appreciate your receiving us on such short notice. I am aware that your time is valuable, and I shall not waste it with unnecessary preamble. Something quite extraordinary has occurred, something that threatens not only my family's reputation but potentially the stability of several significant financial arrangements. I have come to you because this matter requires the utmost discretion, and because Scotland Yard, excellent though they may be in certain respects, would find themselves utterly at sea in the complexities of this affair." Holmes had assumed his characteristic posture of attention, his body utterly still save for his keen eyes, which moved rapidly between our visitors, cataloging every detail with that peculiar intensity I knew so well. "Please, Sir Edmund, Miss Ashworth, be seated," he said, gesturing to the chairs Mrs. Hudson had prepared. "Watson, perhaps you would be good enough to take notes. I suspect this will be a matter requiring careful documentation." He turned back to our visitors. "Now then, I perceive that whatever has disturbed you occurred within the past 36 hours, that it involves a work of art, specifically a painting, and that there is some question of either forgery or unexpected revelation. Furthermore, I deduce that the matter has connections to someone recently deceased, and that you fear scandal not merely for yourselves, but for others who have entrusted their affairs to your family's institution." Miss Ashworth gasped audibly, while her father's expression shifted from anxiety to something approaching awe. "Remarkable," Sir Edmund breathed. "How could you possibly—" Holmes raised a hand. "The explanations can wait, Sir Edmund. Time, I suspect, is a factor in this case. Please tell me, in your own words and in as much detail as possible, exactly what has occurred." Sir Edmund drew a deep breath, composing himself with visible effort. When he spoke, his voice was steady, though the tension beneath his words was unmistakable. "3 days ago," he began, "my uncle, Lord Reginald Ashworth, passed away at his estate in Surrey. He was 82 years of age and had been in declining health for some months, so his death, while deeply felt, was not unexpected. Uncle Reginald was a remarkable man, a scholar, a collector, and in his younger days, an adventurer who had traveled extensively throughout Europe and the Near East. He never married, having devoted his life to the accumulation of knowledge and beautiful objects. His estate, Ashworth Hall, houses one of the finest private collections of art and antiquities in England." "I am familiar with Lord Reginald's reputation," Holmes interjected quietly. "His monograph on Renaissance bronzes was considered definitive, if I recall correctly." "Indeed," Sir Edmund confirmed, seeming slightly comforted by this recognition. "Following his death, the reading of the will took place yesterday afternoon at Ashworth Hall. The estate, with all its contents, was bequeathed to my eldest son, Edmund Jr., who is currently abroad on business in India. However, certain specific bequests were made to various family members, and it is here that our difficulty begins." He paused, glancing at his daughter, who took up the narrative with commendable composure. "Among the specific bequests, Mr. Holmes, was a painting that my great-uncle had always kept in his private study. It was a portrait, supposedly of an unknown Italian nobleman, executed in the style of the late 16th century. Uncle Reginald claimed to have acquired it in Venice some 40 years ago, and he was quite fond of it, though it was never considered among the more valuable pieces in his collection. In his will, he left this painting to me, along with a sealed letter that was to be opened only in my presence. And the contents of this letter? Holmes prompted, leaning forward with evident interest. Miss Ashworth's hands twisted in her lap. The letter was extraordinary, Mr. Holmes. It contained information that, if made public, would cause a scandal of immense proportions. But more troubling still was what happened when we examined the painting more closely, following certain instructions my great-uncle had included in his letter. The painting, Sir Edmund interrupted, his voice tight with strain, is not what it appears to be. Or rather, it is more than it appears. There is something hidden within or beneath it, something that my uncle claimed would expose a secret that has shaped the fortunes of families and nations. Those were his exact words, Mr. Holmes. And now, before we could properly investigate this mystery, the painting has been stolen. The room fell silent save for the crackling of the fire. Holmes remained motionless for a long moment, his eyes half closed in that expression of intense concentration I had witnessed 1,000 times. Stolen, he repeated softly. From Ashworth Hall, I presume. And when did this theft occur? Last night, Miss Ashworth replied. The painting had been moved to the library for safekeeping while we determined what course of action to take. This morning, when I went to examine it again, it was gone. The window had been forced, and there were signs of an intruder, but nothing else was taken, not even the far more valuable paintings and objects that surround it. And the letter? Holmes inquired sharply. I trust you have that secure? I have it here, Miss Ashworth said, withdrawing a folded paper from her reticule. I have carried it with me constantly since receiving it. Holmes extended his hand, and she passed him the document. I watched as his eyes moved rapidly across the page, on his expression unchanging save for the slightest narrowing of his gaze. After a moment, he refolded the letter and returned it to Miss Ashworth. This is indeed a matter of considerable complexity, he said, rising from his chair with sudden energy. Sir Edmund, Miss Ashworth, I shall take your case. However, I must insist upon complete candor from you both. There can be no withholding of information, however embarrassing or seemingly irrelevant it may appear. Lives may depend upon the thoroughness of this investigation, possibly including your own. The gravity of his tone sent a chill through me, and I saw its effect upon our visitors as well. You shall have our complete cooperation, Mr. Holmes, Sir Edmund assured him. What do you require of us? First, I must see Ashworth Hall and examine the scene of the theft. Second, I shall need a complete list of everyone who was present at the reading of the will and everyone who has had access to the house since Lord Reginald's death. Third, he turned to Miss Ashworth, I must know everything your great-uncle told you about this painting, every conversation you can recall, no matter how trivial it may seem. We can depart for Surrey within the hour, Sir Edmund said, rising. My carriage is waiting below. Excellent. Watson, you will accompany us, of course? Certainly, Holmes, I replied, already mentally preparing for what promised to be a most intriguing investigation. As our visitors departed to prepare for the journey, Holmes stood by the window, his fingers drumming against the sill in that restless pattern that indicated his mind was already racing ahead, assembling theories and discarding them with the ruthless efficiency that characterized his method. What do you make of it, Holmes? I asked, gathering my notebook and medical bag. He turned to me, and I was struck by the intensity in his expression. I make of it, Watson, that we are dealing with something far more dangerous than a simple theft. A painting that conceals a secret powerful enough to warrant such elaborate precautions, a death that may not be as natural as it appears, and a thief who knows precisely what he seeks. Add to this the involvement of one of England's most prominent banking families, and we have all the ingredients for a case that could have ramifications far beyond a single crime. You suspect murder, then? I suspect everything and assume nothing, he replied, reaching for his coat. But I will tell you this, my dear fellow, before this case is concluded, We shall uncover secrets that have lain hidden for decades, and we shall find that this painting is not merely a work of art, but a key to a puzzle that someone is desperate to keep locked away forever." With those ominous words ringing in my ears, we descended to the street, where Sir Edmund's carriage awaited. As we set off through the grey London morning towards Surrey and the mysteries of Ashworth Hall, I could not shake the feeling that we were embarking upon one of the most perilous investigations of our long association. The game, as Holmes was fond of saying, was afoot. Author's note: this opening section establishes the central mystery while introducing our Victorian setting and characters. The next section will take us to Ashworth Hall, where Holmes will begin his methodical investigation of the crime scene and the unusual circumstances surrounding Lord Reginald's death and the stolen painting. The clues have been carefully laid, though their significance will only become apparent as the narrative unfolds. Would you like me to continue with Part 2, The Hall of Secrets? Continue the story while maintaining a strong, logical flow that connects seamlessly with the previous part. The transition should feel natural and engaging, ensuring the investigation unfolds smoothly. Every event must build upon the last, leading toward the next development without abrupt shifts. Follow these guidelines. Keep the narrative tightly connected to the previous section. Ensure the timeline remains strong and coherent, no unnecessary jumps or diversions. The tone, pacing, and style must match the established flow. Maintain suspense and intrigue while guiding the story toward the next key moment. Avoid headlines or section breaks. The story should feel continuous and immersive. Always respond directly in chat without breaking the story format. Section 2 of 700 words. No less more words. Begin writing now. The journey to Surrey unfolded beneath a sky heavy with the promise of rain. The carriage wheels thrumming steadily against the cobblestones as we left the crowded streets of London behind. Holmes sat across from me, his eyes closed but his mind clearly alert, his fingers pressed together in that familiar steeple that signaled intense concentration. Sir Edmund and Miss Ashworth maintained a respectful silence, understanding instinctively that my friend was already at work upon the problem. Arranging and rearranging the limited facts we possessed into patterns that might yield some preliminary hypothesis. It was Miss Ashworth who finally broke the silence, her voice soft but clear. "Mr. Holmes, may I ask what you observed about my father and myself that led you to deduce so much before we had spoken a word?" Holmes opened his eyes, and a faint smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Certainly, Miss Ashworth. Your question demonstrates the scientific temperament, an admirable quality. Your father's mourning band is freshly sewn, indicating a recent death, yet his distress seems to stem from something beyond mere grief. The slight discoloration on his right thumb and forefinger suggests he has been handling old paper extensively, documents perhaps, or letters. Your own hands bear traces of the same discoloration, which tells me you have been examining these materials together. Furthermore, there is a small amount of varnish residue beneath your left thumbnail, barely visible but unmistakable to one who looks closely. This suggests direct contact with a painted surface, likely during examination rather than casual appreciation of artwork." "Extraordinary," Sir Edmund murmured. "And you deduced the matter involved a painting from such minute observations?" "That, combined with your statement that the matter was too complex for Scotland Yard, suggested something requiring specialized knowledge, art authentication perhaps, or historical research. The fact that you emphasized discretion and mentioned potential scandal indicated the painting's significance extended beyond mere monetary value. It contained information, then, rather than simply being valuable in itself. The rest followed logically from those premises." I watched Miss Ashworth's expression shift from wonder to something approaching unease. "You mentioned that lives might be in danger, Mr. Holmes. Do you truly believe the situation is so grave? Holmes's features hardened. Miss Ashworth, in my experience, when valuable secrets are at stake, secrets that someone has gone to considerable trouble to conceal for decades, those who possess knowledge of such secrets often find themselves in perilous positions. Your great-uncle kept this matter hidden throughout his lifetime, revealing it only upon his death. That alone suggests he understood the danger. But the fact that the painting was stolen within hours of the will's reading indicates that someone knew of its significance and acted with remarkable speed. Such urgency speaks to desperation, and desperate individuals are invariably dangerous. The carriage had left the outskirts of London now, entering the rolling countryside of Surrey. Through the window, I could see the landscape transforming into the patchwork of fields and woodland that characterized this particular corner of England. The sky had grown darker, and a light rain began to patter against the roof of our conveyance. Sir Edmund leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "There is something else you should know, Mr. Holmes. My uncle's doctor, a man named Thaddeus Carrington, but who had attended him for more than 20 years, expressed certain reservations about the circumstances of my uncle's death." Holmes's attention sharpened immediately. "Reservations? Be specific, Sir Edmund." Uncle Reginald suffered from a weak heart, and Dr. Carrington had warned him repeatedly about overexertion. On the day before his death, however, the doctor noted that my uncle seemed unusually agitated, almost feverish in his manner. He spoke of unfinished business and insisted that his will be reviewed by his solicitor immediately. Dr. Carrington administered a sedative that evening, expecting my uncle to sleep peacefully. Instead, he was found dead the following morning. The death was attributed to heart failure, which was entirely consistent with his condition, and yet Dr. Carrington harbored doubts, Holmes finished. "Did he request an autopsy?" "He suggested it," Miss Ashworth interjected, "but the family felt it would be inappropriate and unnecessary. Uncle Reginald was an old man with a documented heart condition. An autopsy seemed both disrespectful and pointless." "A decision," Holmes said quietly, "that someone may have anticipated and relied upon." The implications of Holmes's words settled over us like the darkening clouds above, and I saw Miss Ashworth's face pale considerably. Her father reached across to grasp her hand, offering what comfort he could, though his own expression betrayed his growing alarm at the direction our conversation had taken. "You believe my uncle was murdered, then?" Sir Edmund asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I believe nothing yet," Holmes replied with characteristic precision. "However, and I consider all possibilities, and the coincidence of Lord Reginald's sudden agitation, followed by his death mere hours before he could take whatever action he had planned, followed in turn by the theft of a painting he claimed contained an explosive secret. Such a sequence strains credulity if we attribute it entirely to chance. Tell me, was anyone outside the immediate family aware of the painting's significance before the reading of the will?" Miss Ashworth shook her head. "The letter was sealed, Mr. Holmes, and the solicitor, Mr. Pemberton, assured us that he knew nothing of its contents. Uncle Reginald had given him explicit instructions that it was to be opened only by me in the presence of witnesses after his death. As far as we know, only Uncle Reginald himself knew what the painting truly represented." "And yet the thief knew precisely which painting to take," Holmes mused, his eyes distant. "Not the Rembrandt sketch in the entrance hall, worth perhaps £3,000. Not the collection of Chinese porcelains in the drawing room, valued at considerably more. Instead, a supposedly unremarkable Italian portrait that your uncle acquired 4 decades ago. This suggests our thief possessed information that should have been impossible to obtain. Could someone have forced the information from Uncle Reginald before his death?" I ventured. "Perhaps that accounts for his agitation." "An astute observation, Watson," Holmes acknowledged. It is certainly one possibility we must explore. Sir Edmund, I shall need to speak with Dr. Carrington at the earliest opportunity, and also with every servant who attended your uncle during his final days. Even the smallest detail, an unexpected visitor, an unusual conversation, anything out of the ordinary routine, may prove significant. The carriage had turned now onto a private lane, bordered on both sides by ancient oaks whose branches formed a canopy overhead. Despite the afternoon hour, the light had grown dim, filtered through both the rain and the dense foliage. We rounded a final curve, and Ashworth Hall came into view, a magnificent structure of Tudor origin, its red brick walls and numerous chimneys speaking to centuries of continuous habitation. The house possessed that quality of quiet dignity that comes only with age and careful stewardship. Yet as we approached, I could not shake a sense of melancholy that seemed to emanate from its very stones. And our carriage drew up before the main entrance, where a butler of advanced years awaited us beneath a broad umbrella. His lined face bore an expression of profound sorrow that seemed to go beyond mere professional sympathy for his late master. "Welcome home, Sir Edmund, Miss Constance," he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine grief. "And Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, the household has been expecting you. I am Blackwood, sir, and I have served the Ashworth family for 43 years. If there is anything I can do to assist in your investigation, you have only to ask." Holmes descended from the carriage and regarded the butler with keen interest. "You were close to Lord Reginald, I perceive." "I had the honor of serving as his personal attendant for the past 2 decades, sir, and after my duties as under-butler became too taxing for my years. His lordship was most generous in allowing me to continue in his service in a reduced capacity." "Then you would have been among the last to see him alive," Holmes observed, his tone sharpening. "We shall speak at length, Blackwood, but first I must examine the library where the theft occurred. Time is of the essence. The thief's trail grows colder with each passing hour." We entered the house through a heavy oak door that spoke of medieval craftsmanship. The entrance hall stretched before us, its walls lined with portraits of previous generations of Ashworths, their painted eyes seeming to follow our progress. The air held that peculiar stillness found in houses of mourning, as though the very atmosphere conspired to honor the dead through silence. The Miss Ashworth led us through a series of corridors, each lined with cabinets displaying various treasures from Lord Reginald's extensive collection. I glimpsed ancient manuscripts under glass, delicate porcelain figures arranged with evident care, and several smaller paintings that even my untrained eye recognized as works of considerable merit. Holmes, however, scarcely glanced at these treasures, his attention fixed entirely upon the path ahead and the occasional observation he made regarding the house's layout and security. "The library is in the east wing," Miss Ashworth explained as we walked. "Uncle Reginald preferred it for his most private work because it has only one entrance and the windows face the rose garden, which offers a clear view of anyone approaching from that direction. He was quite particular about his privacy when engaged in his research." We arrived at a door of carved walnut, which Blackwood opened with a key produced from his waistcoat pocket. The library beyond was a scholar's paradise, floor-to-ceiling shelves laden with leather-bound volumes, a massive desk positioned near the windows, and several comfortable reading chairs arranged around a fireplace where the ashes of a recent fire still lay undisturbed. The room smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and beeswax polish, an aroma that spoke of countless hours devoted to intellectual pursuit. Holmes stepped immediately to the window, ignoring everything else in the room. He withdrew his lens and examined the casement with minute attention, his face nearly pressed against the frame. And I moved to join him and saw at once what had drawn his interest. The window had indeed been forced. The wood splintered around the catch, and muddy marks on the sill indicated where someone had climbed through from outside. "Blackwood," Holmes said without turning. At what hour was this damage discovered? Miss Constance found it at approximately 7:30 this morning, sir. The painting had been resting on that easel by the desk, covered with a cloth as her ladyship had requested the previous evening. And the room was locked overnight? Yes, sir. Miss Constance had the only key, which she kept with her at all times. Holmes nodded, still examining the window. The damage is instructive, Watson. Note the direction of the splintering. The force was applied from outside, as one would expect. However, I observed the pattern of the wood fragments. They have fallen primarily outside rather than inside, which suggests the window was opened from within after the initial forcing. The catch was broken, yes, but the window itself was then deliberately pushed outward, likely to facilitate a quick escape. He moved to the easel, which stood empty save for the cloth that had covered the missing painting. Taking up the fabric, he examined it closely, then brought it to his nose and inhaled deeply. His eyebrows rose fractionally, the only indication of surprise he permitted himself. Miss Ashworth, was your great-uncle in the habit of using a particular cologne or toilet water? She looked puzzled by the question. He favored a bay rum preparation, Mr. Holmes. He had it specially blended by a chemist in London. Why do you ask? Because this cloth bears traces of that scent, which suggests Lord Reginald himself handled it recently, perhaps when placing it over the painting. Yet there is another scent as well, fainter but unmistakable to a trained nose. A woman's perfume, Watson. Something with jasmine and bergamot, unless I am very much mistaken. Quite expensive and distinctly modern in its formulation. Sir Edmund stepped forward, his face troubled. That's impossible, Mr. Holmes. No woman had access to this room after my uncle's death except Constance, and she wears no perfume at all. She finds such things disagreeable. Then we must conclude, Holmes said softly, that a woman was present in this room before Lord Reginald's death, and that she had contact with this cloth and quite possibly with the painting itself. Furthermore, given the freshness of the scent, I would estimate this contact occurred within the past 3 to 4 days at most. He crossed to the desk and began examining its surface with his lens, occasionally picking up a paper or moving an object aside. The desk was remarkably organized for a scholar's workspace. Documents arranged in neat stacks, correspondence filed in a wooden organizer, and writing implements aligned with geometric precision. Your uncle was a methodical man, Holmes observed, running his fingers along the edge of the desk. Everything in its place, a system maintained over years. Yet here we have an anomaly. He pointed to a rectangular outline in the dust, barely visible but distinct to his practiced eye. Something lay here recently. A book or portfolio, perhaps 9 inches by 12. It has been removed within the last 24 hours, judging by the dust patterns. Blackwood, has anything been taken from this desk since Lord Reginald's death? The butler shook his head with certainty. Nothing, sir. Miss Constance gave explicit instructions that the room was to remain untouched until the matter of the painting could be resolved. I supervised the maids myself, and they were instructed only to maintain the fire, nothing more. Then our thief took more than merely the painting, Holmes concluded. He, or she, also removed a document or book that Lord Reginald kept on this desk. Miss Ashworth, did your great-uncle's letter make any mention of additional materials related to the painting? Notes, perhaps? Or research documenting its provenance? Miss Ashworth's hand went to her reticule, where the letter resided. So he mentioned a journal, Mr. Holmes. He wrote that the full story could be found in his private journal, which he kept locked in the desk's bottom drawer. He said the journal would explain everything, where he truly acquired the painting, what he discovered about it, and why he had kept the secret for so long. Holmes moved immediately to the desk drawers, examining each in turn. The bottom drawer showed signs of having been forced, subtle scratches around the lock that spoke of hasty work with some metal implement. The drawer itself was empty save for a few sheets of blank paper and a broken pen nib. "The journal is gone, naturally," Holmes said, his voice carrying a note of frustration. "Our thief was thorough and well-informed. He knew precisely what to take and where to find it. This was no opportunistic burglary, but a carefully planned operation executed by someone with intimate knowledge of Lord Reginald's habits and possessions." He straightened and turned to face our small assembly. "I must now ask a question that may seem indelicate, but I require absolute honesty. Sir Edmund, Miss Ashworth, who among the family or household staff might have had both the knowledge and the motive to commit this theft?" The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Sir Edmund's face darkened with evident distress, while Miss Ashworth looked down at her hands, her composure finally showing signs of strain. It was Blackwood who spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I may be permitted, sir, there is a matter that has troubled me greatly, but which I hesitated to mention for fear of casting aspersions where none may be warranted." "Speak freely, Blackwood," Holmes encouraged. "In matters such as these, suspicions voiced may prove more valuable than courtesies observed." The old butler drew a breath, clearly wrestling with his sense of loyalty. 2 days before his lordship's death, he received a visitor, a woman who gave no name and whom I had never seen before. She arrived in a private carriage with the curtains drawn and insisted upon seeing Lord Reginald immediately. His lordship was most agitated by her appearance, and he instructed me to show her directly to this library. They remained closeted together for nearly an hour, and when she departed, I observed that his lordship was in a state of extreme disturbance. His hands were shaking, sir, and his color was most alarming. I urged him to summon Dr. Carrington, but he refused absolutely and made me swear not to mention the woman's visit to anyone. Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "Describe this woman, Blackwood. Every detail you can recall?" "She was perhaps 40 years of age, sir, though well preserved, tall, with dark hair beneath her veil, and dressed in garments of exceptional quality. French, I would judge, from the cut of her coat. She carried herself with the bearing of one accustomed to moving in elevated society. Her accent, when she spoke those few words to me, suggested education and refinement, though there was something foreign in her pronunciation, Italian perhaps, or Spanish." "And her perfume?" Holmes asked quietly. Blackwood's eyes widened. "Yes, sir. Quite distinctive. Floral, with something sharper beneath. Bergamot, I believe." Holmes's expression underwent a subtle transformation, the tightening of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes, that I had learned to recognize as indicating a significant development in his reasoning. He began to pace the room with that peculiar energy that seized him when disparate facts began to coalesce into a coherent pattern. "This woman's visit is clearly central to our mystery," he declared. "Lord Reginald's agitation following her departure, his sudden insistence upon reviewing his will, and his death occurring within 48 hours of this encounter. These cannot be coincidental. Blackwood, you said she arrived in a private carriage. Did you observe any distinguishing marks upon the vehicle? A crest, perhaps? Aye, or any detail that might aid in identifying its origin?" The butler furrowed his brow in concentration. "The carriage was black, sir, well maintained but unremarkable. However, I did notice that the driver wore livery of a dark green color, and there was a small brass plaque mounted near the door handle. I could not make out the inscription, but it appeared to be a motto or name of some sort." "Excellent," Holmes said approvingly. "Such details, seemingly trivial, often prove invaluable. Now, Sir Edmund, I must ask, did your uncle maintain any correspondence with individuals in Italy? Any connection to Venice specifically, given that he claimed to have acquired the painting there?" Sir Edmund exchanged a meaningful glance with his daughter before responding. "Uncle Reginald traveled extensively in his youth, Mr. Holmes, and he maintained a wide correspondence throughout his life. However, I know he held particular affection for Venice. He spoke often of his time there in the 1850s, and he kept in contact with certain Italian scholars and collectors. I cannot say with certainty whether any of these correspondents were women, though it would not surprise me. My uncle valued intellectual companionship above social convention. Miss Ashworth had grown increasingly pale during this exchange, and now she spoke with evident reluctance. "There is something I should mention, Mr. Holmes, though I fear it may sound like the fancy of an overwrought imagination. When I came to examine the painting on the evening before it was stolen, I had the distinct impression that someone had been in this room recently. Nothing was visibly disturbed, yet there was a quality to the air as though someone's presence lingered. I attributed it to my own nerves at the time, but now, knowing that a woman had been here days before, and that her perfume remains detectable, I wonder if my instinct was correct." "Your instinct was entirely sound," Holmes assured her. "The criminal mind often fails to account for such subtle traces. Our mysterious visitor either returned to this room after Lord Reginald's death, or she never truly left the vicinity of Ashworth Hall. Tell me, have there been any strangers observed on the grounds in recent days? Any unfamiliar servants or tradespeople?" Blackwood shook his head. "The household has been in mourning, sir. We have admitted only family members, the solicitor, the doctor, and the undertaker's staff. No one else has entered the house. I can assure you of that. Then we must consider the possibility that our thief was admitted in some other capacity, or that she possessed knowledge of the house's layout sufficient to enter and exit without detection." Holmes moved to the window again and gazed out at the rose garden beyond. The rain had intensified, and the grounds appeared deserted, save for the skeletal forms of dormant rose bushes. "Watson, come here and observe." I joined him at the window and followed his pointing finger. Below, partially obscured by an ornamental hedge, I could make out a series of indentations in the soft earth. Footprints leading from the window to a gravel path some 20 feet distant. "The thief's escape route," Holmes explained. "Note that the prints appear to be from a smaller boot, quite possibly a woman's, though I shall need to examine them more closely to be certain. The depth of the impression suggests someone of moderate weight moving quickly but not running. Confidence, Watson. Our thief moved with confidence, born of familiarity with these grounds." He turned back to address the others. "I must examine those footprints before the rain obliterates them entirely. Sir Edmund, I shall require a detailed map of the estate, showing all entrances, outbuildings, and paths. Miss Ashworth, I must read your great-uncle's letter in its entirety. Every word may prove significant. And Blackwood, I need you to assemble the household staff. I shall interview each of them individually within the hour." As the others departed to fulfill their assigned tasks, Holmes seized his hat and beckoned me to follow him outside. We descended a narrow servant's staircase that led directly to the garden, emerging beneath a stone archway into the chill afternoon air. The rain had eased somewhat, though a persistent drizzle continued to fall, and I was grateful for the overcoat I had thought to bring. Holmes approached the area beneath the library window with the intensity of a hunting hound following a scent. He dropped to one knee, heedless of the mud, and began examining the footprints with his lens. I stood by with notebook in hand, ready to record his observations, though I confess the prints appeared to my untrained eye as merely shapeless depressions in the wet earth. "Size 5, possibly 5.5, Holmes muttered, more to himself than to me. "A woman's boot well made with a distinctive pattern to the sole. See here, Watson, these parallel grooves. They indicate a continental manufacture, almost certainly Italian. The heel shows minimal wear, suggesting either a new boot or one worn infrequently. The gait is regular, purposeful. No hesitation, no indication of unfamiliarity with the terrain." He rose and followed the trail of prints across the lawn toward the gravel path. The impressions grew fainter as the ground became firmer, but Holmes's practiced eye seemed able to discern what I could not. We reached the path, and here the trail appeared to vanish entirely among the countless marks left by garden staff and the general traffic of the household. Clever, Holmes observed with grudging admiration. She knew the gravel would obscure her tracks. But every criminal makes mistakes, Watson, and our thief is no exception. He pointed to a slight scuff mark on the edge of the path, say where wet gravel had been displaced. She turned left here toward the old carriage house. Come. We followed the path as it curved around a towering yew hedge, the ancient tree providing some shelter from the persistent drizzle. The carriage house stood perhaps 100 yards distant, a substantial stone structure that had clearly once served as stables before being converted to its current purpose. As we approached, I noticed that one of the side doors stood slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. Holmes's hand went immediately to the pocket where I knew he kept his revolver, and I instinctively reached for my own. We had encountered danger too often in our investigations to approach any suspicious circumstance with complacency. Moving with careful stealth, Holmes pushed the door fully open, and we entered the dimly lit interior. The carriage house contained 3 vehicles, a formal barouche, a smaller trap, and what appeared to be a delivery wagon, all resting in their designated spaces. The air held the familiar scents of horse leather, oil, and hay, though no horses were currently stabled here. At first, nothing appeared amiss, but Holmes's sharp eyes detected what mine had missed. There, he said softly, pointing to the earthen floor near the far wall. Fresh wheel marks scored the dirt, leading from a second entrance on the opposite side of the building. More significantly, a small object lay gleaming in the pale light that filtered through the grimy windows. Holmes retrieved it with his handkerchief and held it up for my examination. It was a button, fashioned from mother-of-pearl with an ornate silver backing, clearly torn from a garment of exceptional quality. Inscribed on the silver was a maker's mark, and Holmes's eyes narrowed as he studied it. "Venetian," he pronounced, "from the atelier of Giuseppe Moretti, one of the finest tailors in Italy. This button alone would cost more than most men earn in a week, Watson. It comes from the coat or dress of someone moving in the highest circles of European society." He wrapped it carefully and placed it in his pocket. "Our mysterious woman was here, in this carriage house, and quite recently. The wheel marks indicate a carriage entered from the far entrance, remained for some time. Note the depth of the impressions where the wheels stood stationary, and then departed by the same route." "She had an accomplice then," I ventured. "See, someone waiting with a carriage while she committed the theft." "That would be the obvious conclusion," Holmes agreed, though his tone suggested he was not entirely satisfied with such a straightforward interpretation. "However, we must not allow the obvious to blind us to other possibilities. Let us examine the secondary entrance." We moved through the carriage house to the rear entrance, where heavy wooden doors stood closed but unlatched. Holmes examined the mechanism carefully, noting the layer of dust that had been disturbed by recent use. Beyond the doors, a narrow service road wound away from the estate toward what appeared to be a tradesman's entrance to the property, largely concealed from the main house by a copse of beech trees. "An ideal route for someone wishing to come and go unobserved," Holmes remarked. "This road would connect to the main highway approximately half a mile distant, I should estimate. A carriage could wait here for hours without attracting notice from the household. The question that troubles me, Watson, is one of timing. If our thief used this route to effect her escape with the painting, she must have done so during the night or very early morning hours. Yet Blackwood stated that the theft was discovered at 7:30, which suggests it occurred sometime between midnight and dawn. Perhaps she had assistance from within the household, I suggested. Someone who could ensure she would not be detected. A possibility we cannot dismiss, Holmes acknowledged, though he seemed distracted by some other consideration. He walked along the service road for some distance, occasionally stooping to examine the ground, before returning with a troubled expression. "The rain has done its work too well here, I'm afraid. Any tracks that might have existed have been washed away. We must return to the house and examine Lord Reginald's letter. I suspect it will provide crucial context for understanding why this painting has provoked such desperate action." As we retraced our steps toward Ashworth Hall, I observed Holmes's profile and noted the deep furrows that had appeared on his brow. He was clearly dissatisfied with some aspect of the evidence we had gathered, though I could not discern what troubled him. The case seemed relatively straightforward to my mind. A mysterious woman had visited Lord Reginald, learned of the painting's secret, and subsequently stolen both the artwork and the journal that explained its significance. But yet I knew from long experience that when Holmes appeared troubled by apparently clear evidence, there were complexities I had failed to perceive. We found the household gathered in the drawing room upon our return, a handsome chamber whose tall windows overlooked the front approach. Miss Ashworth sat near the fire, her father standing protectively behind her chair, while Blackwood waited by the door with the deferential patience of the long-serving retainer. The letter lay upon a small table, and Holmes took it up with hands that, I noticed, trembled slightly with suppressed excitement. The document was written in a firm, scholarly hand on heavy paper that bore Lord Reginald's personal watermark. Holmes read it through once rapidly, then again more slowly, his lips occasionally moving as he absorbed particularly significant passages. Finally he looked up, and I saw in his eyes that peculiar gleam that indicated his formidable intellect had seized upon something of profound importance. "This letter is remarkable," he said quietly. "Lord Reginald writes that the painting, which he titled Portrait of a Venetian Nobleman, is in fact nothing of the sort. According to his account, he acquired it in Venice in 1851, not from a gallery or auction house, but from an elderly woman who claimed it had been in her family for generations. She sold it to him for a pittance, needing money for her grandchildren, and thought it merely an adequate copy of a minor Renaissance work." He paused, his finger tracing the lines of script. "Lord Reginald kept the painting for 15 years before he made his discovery. In 1866, while cleaning the surface with a gentle solvent, he noticed an irregularity in the paint layers. Upon closer examination with a magnifying apparatus, he detected what he describes as minuscule script, invisible to the naked eye, incorporated into the decorative elements of the background. This script, he claims, revealed something he calls a truth that could topple dynasties and expose the foundations of certain great fortunes as being built upon deception and stolen inheritance." The silence in the room was absolute. Sir Edmund's face had gone pale, while Miss Ashworth gripped the arms of her chair with white-knuckled intensity. "There is more," Holmes continued, his voice taking on a grave tone. "Lord Reginald writes that he verified his findings through years of research in Italian archives and through correspondence with scholars who were unaware of the true purpose of his inquiries. He became convinced that the painting was created deliberately as a hidden record, a form of insurance perhaps, or evidence meant to be discovered by those who knew what to seek." Holmes set down the letter and fixed Sir Edmund with an intense gaze. "Your uncle concludes by stating that he kept this secret throughout his life because he feared the consequences of revelation, not merely for himself, but for innocent descendants of those implicated by the painting's hidden message. He writes that he entrusted this knowledge to Miss Ashworth because he believed she possessed both the intelligence to understand its significance and the moral character to decide whether the truth should remain buried or be brought to light. He specifically warns that there are those who would go to any lengths to prevent this information from becoming public." "But what information precisely?" Sir Edmund demanded, his composure finally fracturing under the strain. "What could a painting conceal that would justify theft and possibly murder?" "That, I fear, your uncle does not specify in this letter," Holmes replied. He states only that the full explanation resides in his private journal, which detailed his research and conclusions. Without that journal, and without the painting itself, we are left with tantalizing fragments rather than a complete picture. He began pacing before the fireplace, his movements sharp and restless. However, certain deductions can be made. Lord Reginald acquired the painting in Venice in 1851. This was a period of tremendous upheaval in Italy. The Risorgimento, the struggle for unification, the fall of old aristocratic houses, and the rise of new powers. Fortunes were made and lost, ancient families were displaced, and in such chaos, documents were destroyed, histories rewritten, and inconvenient truths buried. Miss Ashworth leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Are you suggesting, Mr. Holmes, that this painting contains evidence of some historical crime, some theft or fraud committed during that turbulent period?" "I am suggesting that the painting was created to preserve evidence that someone wished to be remembered, or perhaps used as leverage at some future date. Consider the method of concealment, microscopic script hidden within the decorative elements. This required extraordinary skill and deliberate planning. Someone went to enormous trouble to create this hidden record, and they disguised it as an unremarkable portrait that might pass through generations without exciting particular interest. It was meant to survive, to endure until the proper moment for its revelation." I found myself drawn into Holmes's reasoning, though the implications troubled me deeply. Then the woman who visited Lord Reginald, she must be connected to whatever secret the painting contains. Perhaps she is a descendant of those implicated, or an agent acting on their behalf. "Precisely, Watson," Holmes affirmed. "She came to persuade or threaten Lord Reginald into surrendering the painting or destroying it. When he refused, as his character suggests he would have, she took more direct action. Whether she herself administered whatever hastened his death, or whether his weak heart simply failed under the stress of their confrontation, we cannot yet determine. But she knew time was running short. The will would be read, the letter opened, and the painting's secret would pass beyond her reach." Blackwood cleared his throat diffidently. "If I may interject, Mr. Holmes, there is one detail that may prove relevant. On the evening of the mysterious woman's visit, and I was attending to his lordship's fire when I overheard a portion of their conversation. The library door was not fully closed, and voices carry in these old rooms. The woman spoke in English, but with that foreign accent I mentioned, and I distinctly heard her say, 'The family will not permit this exposure. Too much is at stake, Reginald. You must see reason.' His lordship replied, 'Reason dictates that truth should prevail over deception, regardless of how many generations have profited from the lie.'" Holmes stopped his pacing abruptly. "Did she mention which family? Any name or specific reference?" "No, sir." At that moment his lordship noticed the door was ajar and closed it firmly. I heard nothing more of their discussion. "Nevertheless, this is invaluable," Holmes said with evident satisfaction. "And we now know that Lord Reginald explicitly refused to suppress the painting's secret, despite being pressured to do so by representatives of some powerful family. This family has remained unnamed, operating through an intermediary, our mysterious woman, who possesses both the resources to arrange a sophisticated theft and the ruthlessness to ensure no evidence remains. The theft of the journal was equally important as the theft of the painting itself, for the journal would have named names and provided the historical context necessary to understand the concealed message." A heavy silence descended upon the room as the full implications of Holmes's analysis became clear. We were dealing not with a common thief motivated by greed, but with agents of a powerful family desperate to protect a secret that had endured for decades. The stakes, and as Holmes had warned from the beginning, were far higher than a simple theft of property. Sir Edmund moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening grounds with evident distress. "Mr. Holmes, my family's bank has conducted business with some of the oldest houses in Europe. If this matter touches upon questions of legitimacy or inheritance, the ramifications could be catastrophic. We hold confidences, manage estates, facilitate transactions, all predicated upon trust and discretion. If we become embroiled in scandal, particularly one involving fraud or disputed succession, the damage to our reputation would be irreparable. "I understand your concerns, Sir Edmund," Holmes replied, though his tone carried a note of steel. "However, we are now past the point where this matter can be quietly swept aside. A crime has been committed, quite possibly multiple crimes, including murder. The law must take its course regardless of who may be inconvenienced or embarrassed by the truth. My task is to recover the stolen property and identify the culprit. What you choose to do with the information once it is recovered is your affair, though I would counsel against suppressing evidence of serious criminality." Before Sir Edmund could respond, we heard the sound of rapid footsteps in the corridor, followed by an urgent knock. Blackwood opened the door to reveal a young footman, his face flushed with exertion. "Begging your pardon, sir," the footman addressed Blackwood breathlessly, "but there's a gentleman arrived at the front entrance demanding to see Miss Ashworth. He says it's a matter of the utmost urgency regarding Lord Reginald's estate. He gave his name as Signore Alessandro Barozzi, and he says he's traveled from Venice specifically to speak with the family." The effect of this announcement upon our company was electric. Holmes's eyes blazed with interest, while Miss Ashworth rose from her chair with an expression of complete bewilderment. "I know no one by that name," she said. "Father, did Uncle Reginald ever mention a Signore Barozzi?" Sir Edmund shook his head slowly, though I detected a flicker of recognition in his features that he quickly suppressed. "Not to my knowledge. However, if he has come from Venice regarding the estate, we should certainly receive him. Mr. Holmes, what do you advise?" Holmes's response was immediate and decisive. "By all means, let us receive this gentleman. Watson, you will observe everything, his manner, his reactions, and any inconsistencies in his account. Sir Edmund, Miss Ashworth, I must ask you to follow my lead in this interview. Say nothing of the painting or the theft unless I specifically introduce these topics. We shall allow Signore Barozzi to reveal his purpose in his own words." The footman was dispatched to show the visitor to the drawing room, and we arranged ourselves with careful casualness. Sir Edmund and his daughter resuming their positions near the fire, Holmes standing with his back to the windows where the failing light would illuminate anyone entering, while leaving his own features partially in shadow, and myself taking a chair positioned to observe the entire scene. The man who entered a moment later was perhaps 50 years of age, impeccably dressed in continental fashion, with dark hair silvering at the temples and a carefully trimmed beard. His features were distinctly Italian, strong nose, expressive eyes, and a mobile mouth that suggested both intelligence and considerable charm. He moved with the easy confidence of one accustomed to good society, yet I detected a certain tension in his bearing, a wariness that suggested he understood he was entering potentially hostile territory. "Miss Ashworth, Sir Edmund," he began, his English excellent though colored by a melodious Italian accent, "I apologize for this intrusion during your time of mourning. I am Alessandro Barozzi, and I had the honor of corresponding with Lord Reginald for many years on matters of art history and Italian antiquities. When I learned of his passing, I felt compelled to travel to England immediately, and there is a matter of profound importance that I must discuss with you, a matter concerning a certain painting that your esteemed uncle acquired in Venice many years ago. Now, generate the final section of the story, ensuring a satisfying resolution. Maintain the logical progression of clues and character arcs, delivering the final reveal smoothly while keeping the ending impactful and true to the detective style." Holmes remained perfectly still, his expression betraying nothing, though I knew him well enough to recognize the intensity of his focus. Miss Ashworth had gone pale, while Sir Edmund's hand gripped the back of his daughter's chair with evident tension. "Indeed, Signore Barozzi," Holmes said softly, stepping forward from the shadows. "So how very convenient that you should arrive at this particular moment to discuss this particular painting. I am Sherlock Holmes, and I am currently investigating the theft of the artwork to which you refer. Perhaps you would care to explain how you came to learn of Lord Reginald's death so quickly, and why a painting acquired 40 years ago should suddenly demand your immediate attention." Barozzi's eyes widened slightly as he registered Holmes's presence, and I saw his posture shift, not with guilt, but with what appeared to be relief. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, then perhaps Providence has brought me here at precisely the right moment. I feared I would have to convince the family of the gravity of the situation, but you, sir, have a reputation for seeing through deception to truth. That is exactly what is needed now." He moved further into the room, accepting Sir Edmund's gesture toward a chair. "I learned of Lord Reginald's death through a telegram from a mutual acquaintance in London, Professor Aldrich of the British Museum, with whom we both corresponded. He knew I had been attempting to contact Lord Reginald on an urgent matter for several weeks, and he thought I should be informed. I took the first available passage from Venice and arrived in London yesterday evening. This morning I learned from Professor Aldrich that there had been a theft at Ashworth Hall. I came immediately, because I believe I know who has taken the painting and why." Holmes's expression sharpened. "You have my complete attention, signore. Please continue." Barozzi drew a deep breath, his hands clasped before him. "The painting that Lord Reginald acquired in 1851 was sold to him by my grandmother, Lucia Barozzi. She was then a widow with 6 grandchildren to feed, and she sold many family treasures during those difficult years. What she did not tell your uncle, what she perhaps did not fully understand herself, was that the painting was far more than it appeared. It had been commissioned in 1598 by my ancestor, Giovanni Barozzi, a notary in Venice who had stumbled upon evidence of a massive fraud." He leaned forward, his voice taking on the cadence of a practiced storyteller. "In that year, a wealthy merchant named Vittorio Grimaldi died, leaving his considerable fortune to his only son, Lorenzo. However, Giovanni Barozzi had witnessed Vittorio's true will, which disinherited Lorenzo for his dissolute behavior and left everything to Vittorio's illegitimate daughter, born of a relationship with a woman of the lower classes. Lorenzo Grimaldi, working with corrupt officials, destroyed the true will and produced a forgery that named him sole heir. My ancestor possessed copies of both documents and knew the truth, but Lorenzo Grimaldi was powerful and dangerous. Giovanni dared not expose him directly. So he commissioned the painting," Holmes interjected, his voice filled with understanding. "A record of the truth, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered by those who knew where to look." "Exactly," Barozzi confirmed. "Giovanni had the artist incorporate the text of the true will into the decorative scrollwork of the painting's background, rendered in script so small it would be invisible without magnification. The painting showed not a generic nobleman, but Lorenzo Grimaldi himself, a portrait that was simultaneously an accusation and evidence of his crime. Giovanni kept this painting in his family as insurance, and it passed down through generations. Most of my ancestors knew only that it was important and must be preserved, but the specific knowledge of what it contained was gradually lost." Miss Ashworth spoke for the first time, her voice trembling. "And the Grimaldi family? What became of them?" Barozzi's expression grew grave. "The fortune Lorenzo stole became the foundation of one of Venice's great trading houses. His descendants prospered, expanded throughout Europe, and eventually intermarried with other powerful families. Today, the Grimaldi interests span banking, shipping, manufacturing, enterprises worth millions of pounds, but their entire fortune rests upon that original theft. If the truth were known, if Lorenzo's crime were exposed and the legitimate heirs identified, the legal challenges would be catastrophic. Everything the family has built over 3 centuries could be dismantled. And these legitimate heirs, Holmes said quietly. They still exist? They do. The illegitimate daughter, Katerina, had children who survived, and their descendants can be traced, though they have lived in obscurity and poverty for generations, unaware of their rightful inheritance. I have been researching this history for years, Mr. Holmes, trying to piece together the truth. When I discovered that Lord Reginald had the painting and had deciphered its secret, I wrote to him, begging for his cooperation. He replied warmly and agreed to meet with me. We had arranged for me to visit Ashworth Hall next month. But now he is dead, and the painting is gone. Stolen by agents of the Grimaldi family, Holmes stated. A woman wearing Italian perfume, arriving in a private carriage, carrying herself with the bearing of high society. She came to persuade Lord Reginald to surrender the painting or destroy it. When he refused, she ensured his silence through more permanent means. Sir Edmund had gone rigid. Are you saying, Mr. Holmes, that my uncle was murdered? That this woman somehow administered poison or— Not poison, Holmes interrupted. Something far more subtle and far more difficult to prove. Lord Reginald had a weak heart. Doctor. That Carrington had prescribed him digitalis for his condition, a powerful medication derived from foxglove, therapeutic in proper doses, but deadly in excess. I suspect our mysterious visitor, during their confrontation, somehow administered an additional dose of digitalis, perhaps in his evening brandy or his medication itself. The symptoms would have mimicked his existing condition, and death would have appeared natural to any physician not specifically looking for foul play. By the time Lord Reginald realized he had been poisoned, it would have been too late to summon help. The room had grown dark, the fire providing the only illumination, and in its flickering light I saw the horror on Miss Ashworth's face. Barotze had risen from his chair, his features twisted with anguish. Then I am too late, he said brokenly. But I should have come sooner, should have warned him of the danger. The Grimaldi family has enormous resources and no scruples about protecting their interests. They would have been monitoring Lord Reginald's correspondence, waiting for any sign that he intended to expose their secret. My letters to him would have alerted them that the truth was about to emerge. Holmes moved to the bell pull and rang for Blackwood. You are not too late, Signore Barotze. The game is not yet finished. You see, our thief made several crucial errors born of desperation and overconfidence. She assumed that by stealing both the painting and the journal, she would eliminate all evidence of the Grimaldi fraud. But she failed to account for three factors. First, that Lord Reginald's letter to Miss Ashworth would survive and provide enough information for someone of my abilities to reconstruct the essential facts. Second, that you would come forward with your own research. And third, that I would be engaged to investigate this matter. Blackwood entered, and Holmes addressed him with quiet authority. I require paper, pen, and sealing wax. Also send word to the local constabulary that I shall need their assistance within the hour. Finally, I want the household staff assembled in the servants' hall, every person who has been in this house during the past week. As Blackwood hurried to comply, Holmes turned back to our company. The woman who visited Lord Reginald and subsequently stole the painting did not act alone. She required inside knowledge, the layout of the house, the location of the library, Lord Reginald's habits and vulnerabilities. She also required time to search for and locate the journal after stealing the painting. This suggests she had an accomplice among the household staff, someone who could provide information and, more importantly, provide access. Sir Edmund's face flushed with anger. You're suggesting one of our servants is a traitor? These people have served the family for years, some for decades. I am suggesting, Holmes replied calmly, that someone in this household was either bribed or coerced into cooperation. The Grimaldi family, as Signore Barotze has explained, possesses vast resources. A servant's annual wages would be nothing to them if it purchased the information they needed. Now, if you will all remain here— I must examine one more piece of evidence that has been troubling me since we arrived." He left the room with characteristic abruptness, and I followed, curious about what had caught his attention. We descended to the ground floor and made our way to a small parlor near the servants' quarters where, I now recalled, we had passed a collection of photographs during our initial entry to the house. Holmes moved directly to a particular frame, removing it from the wall and carrying it to the window where the last light of day still penetrated. The photograph showed the household staff arranged in formal rows. The butler, housekeeper, footmen, maids, and others, all captured in the stiff poses typical of such portraits. "There," Holmes said, pointing to a figure in the second row. "The second housemaid from the left. Note her features carefully. A Watson. The shape of her face, the set of her eyes, the particular curve of her jaw. Now, tell me what you observe." I studied the photograph closely and felt a shock of recognition. "Holmes, she bears a striking resemblance to Signore Barozzi," Holmes finished. "The resemblance is subtle but unmistakable once one knows to look for it. The same distinctive bone structure, the same aristocratic features. This woman is no ordinary housemaid, Watson. She is Barozzi's accomplice, or perhaps something more." We returned swiftly to the drawing room, where Holmes placed the photograph on the table before Barozzi. The Italian's face had gone ashen. "Her name," Holmes said coldly. "And the truth, signore. I have been patient with your narrative thus far, but I will not tolerate deception. Who is this woman? And what is her true role in this affair?" Barozzi slumped in his chair, all his earlier confidence evaporating. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Her name is Lucia Grimaldi, named for my grandmother. She is my sister's daughter, and she is the true heir to the Grimaldi fortune. The illegitimate daughter's line, the legitimate heirs I spoke of, they are my family, Mr. Holmes. We are the descendants of Caterina, cheated of our inheritance 3 centuries ago." The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Holmes's voice was like ice. "Your niece secured a position in this household months ago, no doubt using false references that your resources allowed you to fabricate. She was here to watch Lord Reginald, to report on his activities, and to seize the painting when the opportunity arose. But you wrote to Lord Reginald not to cooperate with him, but to determine how much he knew and whether he could be persuaded or threatened into silence. When he proved intractable, you ordered your niece to act." "No," Barozzi cried, rising from his chair. "You misunderstand. Lucia was here to protect Lord Reginald, not harm him. We knew the other Grimaldis, Lorenzo's descendants, had learned of his research. We knew they would try to silence him. I sent Lucia to watch over him, to warn him of danger. But we were too late. The woman who visited him, who stole the painting, she was not Lucia. She was Contessa Elisabetta Grimaldi, the current matriarch of Lorenzo's line. Lucia tried to prevent the theft, but the Contessa had accomplices. They overpowered her, locked her in the cellar, and stole both the painting and the journal." Holmes's expression remained skeptical. "A convenient story, signore. Yet you possess one critical weakness in your narrative. If your niece was overpowered and imprisoned, why did she not raise the alarm the moment she was freed? Why did the household not know of her plight?" "Because she feared she would be accused of the very crime you now suspect her of committing," Barozzi pleaded. "She was a servant with false credentials, found near the scene of a theft. Who would believe her innocence? She freed herself only this morning and fled the house in panic. She is hiding in the village inn, terrified and uncertain what to do. I came here not only to expose the Grimaldi fraud, but to clear my niece's name and to help recover the painting before the Contessa can destroy it." "Then you will not object," Holmes said with dangerous calm, "to accompanying Dr. Watson and myself to this inn, where we shall interview your niece and test the veracity of her account. Sir Edmund, I suggest you summon the constabulary immediately. Miss Ashworth, I must ask you to remain here with your father and Blackwood. Lock the doors and admit no one until we return. If Signore Barozzi speaks the truth, then the Contessa and her agents are still at large, and may attempt further violence." The journey to the village took only a few minutes in Sir Edmund's carriage. The inn was a respectable establishment called the Swan, and the innkeeper, when questioned, I confirmed that a young woman matching Lucia Grimaldi's description had taken a room that morning, paying in advance and requesting that she not be disturbed. We ascended to the indicated room, and Holmes knocked firmly. "Miss Grimaldi, this is Sherlock Holmes. I am investigating the theft at Ashworth Hall. Please open the door. Your uncle is with me, and I give you my word that you will not be harmed." For a long moment there was silence. Then we heard the sound of a bolt being drawn, and the door opened to reveal a young woman of perhaps 25 years, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion and fear. She wore the plain dress of a servant, but her bearing and features confirmed Barozzi's claim of aristocratic heritage. When she saw her uncle, she collapsed into his arms, sobbing. "Uncle Alessandro, I failed. I tried to protect him. I tried to stop them, but they were too many. The Contessa brought 3 men with her. They seized me while she went to Lord Reginald's room. I heard him cry out, heard the struggle, but I could not break free. By the time I escaped from the cellar, he was already dead, and the painting was gone." Holmes allowed her a moment to compose herself before beginning his interrogation, his tone gentler now, but still probing. "Tell me everything, Miss Grimaldi, from the beginning. When did you first learn that Lord Reginald possessed the painting?" Through tears, she told her story. She had been working at Ashworth Hall for 6 months, employed under the false name of Lucy Gray. Her purpose had indeed been surveillance, but as she insisted, surveillance aimed at protecting Lord Reginald from the other branch of the Grimaldi family. She had known that the Contessa, a ruthless woman who controlled the family's business interests with an iron hand, was aware of Lord Reginald's research and viewed him as a mortal threat to the family's position. "The Contessa arrived 3 nights ago," Lucia explained, her voice steadying as she recounted the events. "I saw her carriage approach using the service road, and I knew immediately what she intended. I tried to warn Lord Reginald, but Blackwood had already admitted her, and she insisted on speaking with his lordship privately. I listened at the door. I know it was wrong, but I had to know what was happening. She tried to negotiate with him first, offering him money, then threatening legal action for defamation. When he refused all her overtures and told her he would expose the truth regardless of the consequences, she became cold. She told him he was a foolish old man who would not live to see his precious truth revealed. And then," Holmes prompted, "Lord Reginald ordered her to leave. She did, but I saw her speak briefly with her coachman before departing. That night, I watched Lord Reginald's room from the servants' staircase. I saw the Contessa's men enter his chamber. They had somehow gained access to the house, perhaps through a window or a door I had not secured. One of them carried a medical bag. I tried to raise the alarm, but they had anticipated my interference. They grabbed me, gagged me, and locked me in the old wine cellar. I heard footsteps above throughout the night. By dawn, all was silent. When I finally worked the lock free using a wire from my corset, it was morning. I went to Lord Reginald's room and found him dead. The painting was already gone from the library, and I knew I would be blamed. So I ran." Holmes considered her account carefully, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Your story is consistent and contains details that support its veracity. However, I require proof. You say the Contessa's men carried a medical bag. Can you describe it?" "Black leather with brass fittings. It bore a crest, a griffin holding a sword. The same crest that appears on all Grimaldi family possessions." "And the Contessa herself, describe her in detail." Lucia provided a description that matched precisely what Blackwood had observed. a tall woman of about 40, dark-haired, elegantly dressed in French fashion, wearing perfume with jasmine and bergamot. She added one crucial detail that Blackwood had not been positioned to observe. She wore a distinctive ring on her right hand, a large emerald surrounded by diamonds, set in gold. It was an heirloom, famous in the family. My uncle can confirm its existence. Barozzi nodded emphatically. The Emerald of Murano, commissioned by Lorenzo Grimaldi in 1605, using money stolen from the rightful heirs. It has been worn by the head of the family for generations. Its presence would confirm the wearer's identity beyond doubt. Holmes rose from his chair with sudden energy. Then we have our course of action. The Contessa has stolen the painting and the journal, but she cannot have gone far. She will need time to examine the painting, extract or destroy the hidden evidence, and ensure that no copies or additional records exist. She will also be monitoring the situation here, waiting to see if her crimes have been detected. Signore Barozzi, I require your cooperation. You will write to the Contessa, a message that will be delivered through channels you know she monitors. You will inform her that you have obtained Lord Reginald's journal through separate means, and that you are prepared to expose the Grimaldi fraud unless she meets with you to negotiate a settlement. But I don't have the journal, Barozzi protested. No, but she doesn't know that. We shall arrange a meeting, someplace public enough to ensure your safety but private enough to allow for frank discussion. We shall suggest the reading room of the British Museum tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. She will come, believing she can eliminate the last threat to her family's secret. Instead, or she will walk into a trap with Inspector Lestrade and his men waiting to arrest her for murder and theft. I felt compelled to interject. But Holmes, without the painting or the journal, how can we prove any of this? It will be her word against that of Barozzi and his niece, hardly disinterested witnesses. A thin smile played across Holmes's features. You touch upon the case's central weakness, Watson, which is why we shall not rely upon testimony alone. We shall recover the painting. But how? Miss Ashworth had entered with her father and Blackwood, having followed us to the inn despite Holmes's instructions. How can you possibly know where the Contessa has hidden it? Because, Holmes replied with quiet confidence, I know that she has not yet left England. The painting and journal are too valuable to entrust to subordinates or to transport without her personal supervision. She will have taken a house or rooms nearby, somewhere she can examine the painting at leisure and plan her next moves. Furthermore, she will be aware that we are investigating and will want to monitor our progress. Where better to do so than from a location that offers a view of Ashworth Hall itself? He moved to the window of the inn and pointed toward the hills that rose beyond the village. There are 3 substantial houses visible from this vantage point, each with a clear line of sight to Ashworth Hall. One is inhabited by the local squire and his family, unlikely. Another is a hunting lodge owned by a London merchant, currently closed for the season according to the innkeeper. In the third is a smaller estate called Blackthorn Manor, which I observed was showing lights when we arrived this evening, despite being supposedly unoccupied. That is where we shall find the Contessa Elisabetta Grimaldi and the stolen painting. Sir Edmund's face was grave. Mr. Holmes, you're proposing to confront a woman who has already committed murder. She will be guarded, dangerous, and desperate. Should we not simply inform the police and allow them to handle the matter? The local constabulary, while doubtless competent in their usual duties, are not equipped to handle an adversary of this caliber, Holmes replied. The Contessa has wealth, connections, and the advantage of diplomatic complications. She is a foreign national of some standing. If we approach this clumsily, she will slip away, and the evidence will vanish forever. No, we must proceed with subtlety and precision. I have a plan, but it will require the cooperation of everyone in this room and a degree of theatrical performance that may test your abilities. Over the next hour, Holmes outlined his strategy with characteristic thoroughness. Barozzi would indeed write to the Contessa, but the letter would be delivered that very evening by a messenger, we would observe, allowing us to confirm the location of her hideaway. Meanwhile, Lucia would return to Ashworth Hall in secret, using the servants' passages she knew intimately. Her task would be to search Lord Reginald's study for any additional documents he might have hidden. Holmes suspected the old scholar would have created some form of backup record, perhaps photographs of the painting's hidden text or copies of key documents from his research. And Sir Edmund and Miss Ashworth would remain at the hall, maintaining the appearance of a household in mourning while actually preparing to receive the constabulary. I would accompany Holmes on a nighttime reconnaissance of Blackthorn Manor, during which we would attempt to confirm the Contessa's presence and locate the painting. If successful, we would return with the authorities at dawn to make the arrest. "It is a dangerous plan," Holmes acknowledged as we prepared to depart. "The Contessa has already killed once and will not hesitate to do so again if she believes herself threatened. However, we have certain advantages. She believes herself safe, having eliminated Lord Reginald and stolen the evidence. She does not know that we have identified her or that we understand the full scope of her crime. And surprise and preparation are our allies." As darkness fell fully over the Surrey countryside, we set our plan in motion. Barozzi composed his letter with care, its contents calibrated to alarm the Contessa sufficiently to ensure her attention while not revealing the extent of our knowledge. A local boy was engaged to deliver it, and Holmes and I followed at a discreet distance as he made his way toward Blackthorn Manor. The house stood isolated at the end of a narrow lane, surrounded by overgrown gardens that spoke of long neglect. Yet as we observed from the shelter of a stone wall, we could see lights burning in several windows and the silhouette of a figure moving behind curtains. A carriage stood in the drive, elegant, expensive, with the curtains drawn. Even in the darkness, I could make out the brass plaque Blackwood had mentioned. I mounted near the door. "She is here," Holmes breathed, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Now we must determine the interior layout and locate the painting. The operation must be swift and silent. We cannot risk alerting her guards." We circled the property carefully, using the overgrown shrubbery as cover. Through the windows, we observed 3 men, rough-looking individuals who were clearly hired muscle rather than ordinary servants. They moved through the ground floor rooms with the restless vigilance of those on guard duty. The Contessa herself was not visible, suggesting she was likely on the upper floor. Holmes led me to a small conservatory attached to the rear of the house, its glass panels offering potential access. The door was locked. But Holmes's skills with lockpicks, developed through years of practical necessity, made short work of the mechanism. We slipped inside, finding ourselves among dusty tropical plants that had long since grown wild from neglect. Beyond the conservatory lay a library, and it was here that we discovered what we sought. The painting rested on a table, illuminated by several lamps, with a powerful magnifying apparatus positioned above it. Beside it lay Lord Reginald's journal, open to a page covered in his neat handwriting. The Contessa herself sat before this display, her profile visible in the lamplight, her attention completely absorbed by what she was reading. She was precisely as Lucia and Blackwood had described, an elegant woman whose beauty was rendered severe by the hardness of her expression. As we watched, and she picked up a small knife and approached the painting, clearly intending to begin the work of destroying the evidence it contained. Holmes moved with startling speed. He burst from our hiding place into the library, his voice ringing with authority. "Contessa Elisabetta Grimaldi, I am Sherlock Holmes, and I am placing you under arrest for the murder of Lord Reginald Ashworth and the theft of his property." The Contessa spun toward us, the knife still in her hand, her face a mask of fury and shock. "You! How did you find me? Who told you?" She lunged not at us but at the painting, clearly intending to destroy it even at the cost of her own freedom. I drew my revolver, but Holmes was faster. He seized a heavy vase from a nearby shelf and hurled it with remarkable accuracy, striking the Contessa's hand and sending the knife clattering across the floor. She cried out in pain and rage, but before she could recover, the door burst open and her guards rushed in, attracted by the commotion. What followed was a brief but intense struggle. I fired a warning shot that shattered a window, causing the lead guard to hesitate. Holmes grappled with another, using his knowledge of Baritsu to disable the man with efficient precision. The third guard drew a cudgel and advanced on me, but at that moment, the front door crashed open and Inspector Lestrade entered at the head of 6 constables, summoned by Holmes's prearranged signal. The fight went out of our opponents immediately. The guards were subdued and manacled, while the Contessa, clutching her injured hand, Mike was compelled to sit as Lestrade formally charged her with murder. "You have no proof," she spat, her accent thickening with emotion. "The word of servants and treasure hunters against a Contessa of Venice? I will have the finest solicitors in London. I will have diplomatic intervention from the Italian government. You cannot touch me." Holmes lifted the journal from the table, his expression cold. "On the contrary, Contessa, we have considerable proof. This journal documents Lord Reginald's research in exhaustive detail, including his correspondence with scholars who can verify his findings. The painting itself contains evidence that will be examined by experts from the British Museum and the Royal Academy. Your fingerprints are upon both items, placing you at the scene of the theft. Furthermore, we have testimony from multiple witnesses regarding your visit to Ashworth Hall and your threats against Lord Reginald's life." He moved closer, his voice dropping to a tone of quiet intensity. "But most damningly, we have this." He withdrew from his pocket the mother-of-pearl button we had discovered in the carriage house. "This came from your coat, torn loose during your escape after the theft. It bears your fingerprints and can be matched to the missing button on the garment you are wearing at this very moment. Combined with the forensic analysis of Lord Reginald's body, which I have convinced Dr. Carrington to conduct post-mortem, we shall prove you administered an overdose of digitalis that caused his death. Your position and nationality will not shield you from English justice, madam. You will hang for murder." The Contessa's face went ashen, and I saw the moment when her aristocratic composure finally shattered. She slumped in her chair, all the fight draining from her body. "He would not listen," she whispered. "I offered him everything, money, position for his family, priceless artworks from our collection. All he had to do was destroy the painting and forget what he knew. But he refused. He said truth mattered more than any bribe I could offer. He was going to expose us, destroy 3 centuries of my family's position. What choice did I have?" "You had the choice to accept the consequences of your ancestors' crime," Holmes replied without sympathy. "Instead, you chose to compound that ancient fraud with murder. The choice was always yours, Contessa, and you chose poorly." As Lestrade led the prisoners away, Holmes carefully wrapped the painting and journal, ensuring they would be preserved as evidence. We remained in the library as dawn broke over the Surrey countryside, and I saw my friend's features soften with satisfaction, the look of a man who has solved a puzzle that tested his considerable abilities. "A remarkable case, Watson," he said quietly. "A 3-century-old crime concealed within a Renaissance painting, protected by murder and threatened by greed. It contained elements of history, art, criminality, and moral philosophy. Precisely the sort of problem I find most stimulating." "And the Barozzi family?" I asked. "What becomes of their claim to the Grimaldi fortune?" "That will be determined by Italian courts and may take years to resolve. But with Lord Reginald's research and the painting's evidence, they have a legitimate case. The rightful heirs may finally receive justice, though centuries delayed." He picked up the painting, examining it in the morning light. "Giovanni Barozzi was a clever man, Watson. He understood that the truth, properly preserved, will eventually emerge. It took 300 years, but his hidden message has finally been read. We returned to Ashworth Hall as heroes, bearing the recovered painting and journal. Miss Ashworth wept with relief, while Sir Edmund expressed gratitude that bordered on the effusive. The painting was subsequently authenticated by experts from the British Museum, who confirmed that the microscopic text hidden within its decorative borders contained the full text of Vittorio Grimaldi's true will, complete with witnesses' names and signatures rendered in minute detail. And the case became something of a sensation in the newspapers, though the full details were never published out of respect for the families involved. The Contessa Elisabetta Grimaldi was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life imprisonment, though she died within 2 years, some said of shame and a broken spirit. Her branch of the Grimaldi family was forced to negotiate a settlement with the Barozzi descendants, resulting in a division of the fortune that provided some measure of justice, however delayed. Dr. Carrington's post-mortem examination revealed traces of digitalis in quantities that could only have been administered deliberately, vindicating Holmes's theory of murder. Lucia Grimaldi was cleared of all suspicion and later became a prominent advocate for the proper attribution of Renaissance artworks, using her family's restored fortune to fund scholarly research. The painting itself was eventually donated to the British Museum, where it remains on display as a remarkable example of hidden historical documentation and the ingenious methods by which truth can be preserved against those who would suppress it. A small plaque notes its connection to the Ashworth case, though most visitors pass it by without understanding its significance. As for Holmes and myself, we returned to Baker Street with another solved mystery to add to our collection. Holmes kept the mother-of-pearl button as a souvenir, occasionally taking it from his desk drawer to examine when a case proved particularly challenging. It served as a reminder, he said, that even the most powerful criminals leave traces, and that thoroughness and observation will always triumph over arrogance and violence. "The case illustrates several important principles, Watson," he remarked one evening as we sat by the fire, the rain pattering against our windows. "First, that crimes committed today may have roots stretching back centuries. Second, that the desire to protect reputation and fortune remains one of the most powerful motivators for criminality. And third, that truth, however long suppressed, possesses a vitality that allows it to survive and eventually emerge." I raised my glass in acknowledgement. A fitting epitaph for Lord Reginald Ashworth, a man who died defending truth against those who would murder it along with him. "Indeed," Holmes agreed, his gray eyes distant with thought. "He was a scholar of courage and principle. The world has lost a valuable man, but his final act ensured that an ancient injustice was finally rectified. There are worse legacies." The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across our familiar sitting room, and I reflected on the strange path that had led us from a desperate summons to Surrey to the exposure of a 3-century conspiracy. It was, in its way, a perfect encapsulation of the work that had bound Holmes and myself together for so many years, the pursuit of truth through observation, logic, and unwavering determination. "What shall you call it when you write it up for your chronicles?" Holmes asked, a trace of amusement in his voice. I considered for a moment, then smiled. "I think I shall title it The Case of the Painting That Exposed a Secret. It seems appropriately descriptive." Don't you think?" "Adequately so," Holmes replied with characteristic modesty. "Though perhaps you might note in your account that the case also demonstrates the dangers of delayed justice and the importance of documentation in preserving truth. Future generations should understand that crimes unpunished in one era may still demand accounting in another." I made a note in my journal, preserving Holmes's observation for inclusion in my narrative. As I wrote, I could not help but feel a sense of satisfaction in knowing that we had been instrumental in bringing both a murderer to justice and in rectifying a centuries-old wrong. It was, I reflected, exactly the sort of work that made our partnership meaningful. the application of reason and courage in service of justice, regardless of how powerful or privileged the criminal might be. And the case of the painting that exposed a secret was closed, but its lessons would endure, as would the reputation of the remarkable man who had solved it through intellect, observation, and an unwavering commitment to truth above all other considerations. Thus ended one of the most complex and historically significant cases of our long association, a mystery that spanned centuries and required the full application of Sherlock Holmes's extraordinary abilities to resolve. The painting hangs still in the British Museum, its secret now revealed, a testament to the proposition that truth, however deeply buried, will eventually come to light when pursued by those with the wit to find it and the courage to expose it.